I'm going to take you on a trip around the southwestern islands of Scotland. It turns out you can do a pretty good bicycle tour on these using the ferries to connect to the islands. There's not much need to cycle on the mainland at all. So I'm going to start at the port of Ardrossan, which crosses over to Arran. You can get there by train. There's a train that actually goes to the port itself from Glasgow. What I actually did was I was coming from Ireland, so I got the ferry over from Belfast, and then I was also cycling up through Ayr, following Eurovelo 1, and then there's quite good cycle paths most of the way up to Ardrossan. So another option would be to get the train to Ayr, which you can get to again from Glasgow or from other locations. They're both good starting points. So once you get to Ardrossan, there's a Claonaig ferry. Claonaig's the Scottish ferry company. It does most of the island crossings except to Orkney, I think. And that runs a few times a day. You do need to book it in advance as you get into the summer months because there's a lot of people doing it, including quite a lot of people on bicycles. It's a very good way of actually seeing the islands. Once I got over to Arran, I had decided to spend the first night at the Glen Rosa campsite, which is quite near to Brodick, the port you land on. It's basically a very basic campsite that just has a set of toilets. There's a river running through it, which I'd swim in to wash the sweat off, and it's a good base if you want to then hike Goatville or head to the blue pools, I think they're called. So that was my first night. The next day I got up, I cycled up over what's called the String, which is the high road that runs across the island, and then down to Machrie Moor to visit the spectacular set of stone circle complexes that are found there. I think there's three big stone circles and multiple single and pairs of standing stones. Very worthwhile doing. It's a little off-road, but you can actually, it's kind of rough gravel, but you can actually cycle to the first of the stone circles. It's a not insubstantial walk if you're going to walk it. And then from there I was headed up the western coast. There's a road that runs pretty much exactly by the coast itself. Very quiet, not much traffic on it. And that got me to Lochranza, where there's a community pub, but also a campsite. So there are plenty of wild camping spots around Lochranza as well, but in this case I decided I was going to go for the showers and the chance to recharge a battery. And also I was up very early the following morning, because it's from Arran you can't directly get on a ferry to any of the other islands, but what you can do is you can get on a ferry that runs over to Kintyre, which is just across from Lochranza. So that's the Mull Kintyre Peninsula, and that ferry, I think it starts at about 7:30 in the morning, and it's going about every 20 minutes. So it's one of those ones where you just turn up and pay when you get on board. It's a short crossing. Once you get over to the other side, though, you've got to go up quite a steep hill, up and over quite a steep hill. It's about 10 kilometres to the ferry port on the other side. And there's a couple of crossings a day on a substantial ferry that brings you into Islay. So once in Islay, I headed up on the high road there across to Bowmore, which is the main town on the island, famous for its whiskey distillery probably in particular. And the thing about Islay to realise is that, in fact, because it's got this huge whiskey reputation, that the tourism on the island has turned into very high-end, very expensive tourism, basically. So people with plenty of money going over there. And that does tend to make most of the restaurants and stuff outside of hotels or any of those things well outside of what a cycle tourist budget would be. I had decided to wild camp on Islay. I had initially intended to do so up at Machrie Bay, but thunderstorm warnings and the promise of 50 millimetres of rain, which is a lot of rain, caused me to cut that trip up there short. I pulled into a bit of the bay itself across from Bowmore, camped there overnight. Of course, as always happens in this case, it didn't actually rain, and then I headed up to Machrie Bay the next morning, had a look around up there. So I've just made it to Machrie Bay, which was my original
wild camping intention for last night until I saw the thunder warnings and 50 centimetres rain and all that stuff, which of course didn't happen. So I kind of regret that I didn't make it down here, because it's absolutely beautiful. There's one car in the car park, so there may be people camping here somewhere, but I haven't seen them.
And then headed down to the ferry point that crosses over to the island of Jura. So that's 2 islands so far, and we're about to do a third. So the ferry crossing to Jura, it's another one of these very small ferries that just runs back and forth pretty much constantly. It's probably like a 10-minute crossing or so. You just turn up and pay again. And once you get to Jura, they amusingly have a single road really on Jura that's called the Long Road, because it runs down around the bottom of the island to the one town, and then it runs all the way up to the north, although after about 20 kilometres it becomes a dirt track. So I headed over to the one town that's there, stayed in the not in the hotel, sorry. The hotel there has a campsite just outside it. Again, showers, all that sort of thing were quite welcome. Recharged my battery again in the pub that was there in the hotel, that is. And then that was day 3 and 3 islands down. So day 4, I did a bit of a trip around Jura, visited a couple of the standing stones there. So I'd getting lost in the woods challenge this morning, because I knew there was another standing stone up here somewhere, about a kilometre out of Craighouse, and it was hidden in the bracken. It's a rough forest trail, but there it is. I found it. Well, I can tell you the water is not as cold as the air warm as the air temperature. And there's one of the 3 paps up there, just about in sight. And then headed back to the ferry back across to Islay, and then I actually stopped immediately in that little ferry port, because this was the exciting thing I had spotted. Twice a week a ferry comes up. It comes all the way up, stops at Islay, where I got on, then goes up to Colonsay, which is this quite small island that's relatively difficult to get to otherwise, and then it goes on to the town of Oban. And this is the magic trick for this part of the cycle, because from Oban you can get back on a train that's going to bring you back to Glasgow and complete your trip. But I wasn't doing that immediately. I was getting the ferry up to Colonsay. That was a great ferry trip altogether. It's very beautiful, because it's going up in the sound between Jura and Islay, and you're going past the paps, and so it's great scenery on both sides. And then behind us, as we were sort of arriving a little bit before sunset, the sun was going down, I realised there was an absolutely huge pod of dolphins following the ferry. I would guess the numbers to have been about 100 to 150, so very spectacular bit of dolphin watching there as well. That gets you into the port of Colonsay. It only stops there for half an hour to let people off and then reload, and then it headed off to Oban. But I headed up initially to the hotel on the island to get a pint before setting out to look for somewhere to camp for the night. Now, when I was at the hotel, my phone buzzed, and everybody else's phone in the bar buzzed as well, and everybody groans, because what had happened was they had cancelled the ferry that was meant to be going the following morning to Oban. So I had intended to only be in Colonsay overnight, but that ended up being 2 nights. Not a disaster at all. Left the hotel, found a spot to camp on the beach up the north end of the island, stayed there for the night, visited Colonsay House the next day, also the the Methodist church that's now turned into an island museum there. That's really worth visiting, highly recommended, very fascinating. And in particular, the story of the Colonsay idol, which I tell in my longer video. So each of these days I'm talking about, this is an overview of this trip. But in fact, I've done a fairly long video for each of these days that gives you much more details about what I was doing. Check the playlist at the end of the video and you'll get those. And then for my second night, I headed down to the far end of the island. There's an airfield there, and across from the airfield there's a golf course, and at the end of the golf course there's a bit of land that's essentially not pinched off, but there's limited access to it. There's sheep grazing on it, but not much going on, so I camped there for the night. absolutely beautiful, stunning weather. I'd got a bottle of wine down in the village store, so I had a great meal there. There's some, if you look at my long video for this day, there's some video of me singing to the sheep.
We are the Lamb Gang, the crazy Lamb Gang.
And I went swimming, and unfortunately I did a tragic error at the stage, because I went swimming with my GoPro to do some footage of me in the water. Didn't realise I hadn't closed the battery door properly, and it just suddenly died on me, and that was it. I found myself without a GoPro, so I thought I wouldn't have all my road footage for the rest of the tour. Did come up with a solution about that. That's another story, but I'd probably tell in the next sequence of videos. Second day in Colonsay, went back down, hiked up the hill to, I think there's a monument to a Lord Colonsay above the town, then caught the ferry that went on, brought me into Oban. Now, in Oban, I ended up staying the night in a campsite that's about 3 kilometres out of town. You'll see that on the map. I from here, in terms of this 6-7 day trip that I'm describing, you could then get on the train back to Glasgow the next day, and then make your own way home from there. In fact, what I did was I was heading on a much bigger tour of Scotland, so you'll find that on my day-to-day diaries. Again, check out the playlist at the end. But the next summary video I'm going to be doing is going to be talking about cycling the rest of the Inner Hebrides, which is basically I'm going to get the ferry from Oban over to Mull. I'm going to go from Mull to Iona, and then I'm going to cross back to the mainland, cycle up and get the ferry crossing to Skye, and then I did a loop of Skye. And in the next video I'll be leaving you there, but in terms of the overall tour, I then went to the Outer Hebrides. I'm going to be doing a sequence of shorter summary videos for people who might be thinking of doing a shorter trip. So this one I've just described, it took me 6 nights, but I could have done it in 5 if that ferry to Colonsay had arrived the following morning as it was intended. Hope you found this useful. If you have, maybe give the video a like and a share. Also, if you're interested in my future trips and following me live as I'm doing them, give my Instagram a follow. That's Ebike Touring Life. I'm also on TikTok, not quite sure what I'm doing there. And as I always tell people to do read the video description. I'll include links in there to some of the other videos I've been talking about here. And if you have something to say about this particular circuit, or you want to ask a question, post a comment. I'll read it, I'll respond to it if it's a question, and you may well have additional information that I have not mentioned here that would be useful for other people to read, so do read the comments if you are looking at this, finding the video useful, thinking of doing it yourself, and hopefully one day I shall see you on the road.